The Interplanetary Student Exchange Initiative sounded impressive on paper, a galactic program that united species from over 90 systems, encouraging cultural exchange and understanding through shared education. In reality, it mostly resulted in awkward cafeteria seating arrangements and the occasional interspecies allergy outbreak. At the Virelia Institute for Cosmic Understanding on the orbiting station Nuvrax 9, humans were still something of a novelty. The first few months had been a parade of questions about meat consumption, Earth's weather, and why humans insisted on using sarcasm in life or death conversations. Jaren Vollen never thought he'd end up here. He was 21, lanky, with a permanently furrowed brow that made him look perpetually skeptical. A computer engineering student from Arizona, Jaren joined the program out of curiosity and a well-timed scholarship. What he hadn't expected was to be labeled timid by the alien students within 3 days of arrival. "Your kind avoids confrontation to a self-destructive degree," said Yilrex during their Ethics of Conflict class, its 6 eyes blinking in unsynchronized disapproval. "You yield even when you are correct. You retreat instinctively." Jaren had blinked. "We're not timid, we're just not psychotic." An uncomfortable snort came from the back of the room. Krek, a scaled being from the Trelax cluster, whispered something to Jazan, a hulking, armor-backed student from the planet Drex. Both turned to glance at Jaren with that same amused condescension. Later that day, Jaren found himself venting to his friend Junia Terrell in the hydroponics garden. "They think we're weak," he muttered, plucking a leaf off a purple lettuce hybrid. "Like we're too scared to stand up for ourselves." Junia, a bright-eyed med student from Chicago with a black braid that reached her lower back, shook her head. "Because we don't lunge at every insult like a Nork beast, let them think what they want. They don't just think it, they're saying it in class. Then let them." "You're not here to prove anything." "I'm not trying to prove anything," Jaren replied, "but it's hard to ignore when half the station thinks you'd run from a shadow." Junia smiled faintly. "Well, don't give them the satisfaction, just be you." Quiet doesn't mean cowardly. That advice held for another 2 weeks. Then something changed. Jaren was walking down Corridor 12 when he saw Junia arguing with Krek near the station's neutral zone. At first, he thought it was a misunderstanding. Those still happened often, especially around sarcasm or eye contact norms. But then he saw Krek shove her, hard. Junia lost her balance and crashed into the wall. Her shoulder hit the edge of a recessed panel and she dropped to the floor with a sharp cry. Jaren sprinted without thinking. By the time he reached them, Krek had turned away, arms raised in a dismissive gesture. Jaren didn't stop. He slammed into Krek, knocking him sideways into the corridor wall. The alien stumbled, more surprised than hurt, but Jaren didn't let that stop him. "You don't touch her." Jaren's voice was low and shaking. Krek hissed in reply. "She insulted my origin hierarchy. She made a joke about your cooking," Jaren snapped. "And you shoved her into a wall." Junia was groaning quietly, clutching her shoulder. Jaren crouched beside her, helping her sit up. "I think it's dislocated," she mumbled through clenched teeth. Jaren turned back to Krek. "You're going to the disciplinary board." Krek sneered, if that was the right word for the way his facial plates shifted. Timid humans play victim well. Jaren stood slowly. He didn't back up. "You want to see Timid? Try touching her again." Security arrived moments later, alerted by the station's passive conflict sensors. Krek was taken away. Junia was rushed to the medical wing. It turned out her shoulder wasn't just dislocated, it had torn a tendon. She'd need surgery, followed by at least 6 weeks of limited movement. Jaren stayed by her side through the pre-op scans and the med team's debates over human pain thresholds. When she finally came out of the operating suite, groggy and pale, she whispered, "You tackled a Trelaxian." "You needed help," Jaren said. "Didn't think about what he was." By the next day, the incident had spread across the station. Jaren was summoned to a formal inquiry and questioned for over an hour by a panel of staff and interspecies mediators. Why did you resort to physical action? Asked Instructor Valia, a translucent being with a voice like shifting sand. Jaren leaned forward. Because he attacked my friend. I reacted. Did you consider that your response could be seen as escalation? He already escalated when he put someone in the medical wing. There was a pause. He violated the code of interspecies conduct, Valia conceded. Your intervention was reactive, not preemptive. This will be noted. No punishment was issued, but the station's atmosphere had changed. Jaren started getting odd looks in the corridors. Not hostile, just different. Measured. Curious. The same aliens who'd once snickered at him now gave him a wider berth or nodded slightly as he passed. He tried to shrug it off, but the shift was undeniable. One afternoon, Jaren was in the gym, jogging on the anti-grav track when Jazan appeared. The Drexian towered over most beings, covered in bio-armor and known for his aggressive style in the station's mock combat activities. You defended your injured companion, Jazan said abruptly, stepping onto the track beside Jaren. Jaren slowed his pace, wary. Yeah, I did. You acted without backup, without regard for your own species' vulnerabilities. That was unexpected. Look, I didn't do it to impress anyone. Jazan stared at him. It was impressive nonetheless. You are not timid. Jaren blinked. Thanks, I guess. Jazan nodded once, then walked away. That was the whole conversation. Later that week, Ylrex approached him in the library. I have reviewed the footage of the incident, Ylrex said. I retract my earlier assessment regarding your species' disposition. Jaren closed his book. So now humans are, what, head-headed, adaptive, Ylrex said, courageous under pressure but unpredictable. Jaren gave a tired laugh. I'll take that. Junior returned to class within a week, her shoulder immobilized in a translucent sling. She walked more carefully, but her voice remained sharp. Remind me to never let you handle diplomacy, she said one day, nudging Jaren with her good arm. He smiled faintly. Wasn't my best moment. It was exactly the moment I needed. Things didn't go back to normal, they shifted into something new. Jaren started getting invitations to join study groups led by non-human students. He was asked to speak during a conflict resolution seminar. Not about violence, but about the decision to act and the cost of doing nothing. He never claimed to represent humanity. But somehow, his actions had become a reference point. Even Krek, after his suspension, crossed paths with Jaren weeks later in the mess hall. There was no apology. Just a stiff nod and a muttered, your reaction was. Noted. Jaren didn't respond. He just returned to his seat beside Junia, who was trying to eat noodles one-handed. Still hurts, he asked. Only when I laugh, she said. So stop being funny. He grinned, then looked around at the other students, many of whom still watched him from a distance. You think they'll ever stop talking about it? Junia shrugged. Probably not, but maybe now they'll think twice before calling us timid. Jaren leaned back in his chair. I'm okay with that. 3 weeks after the incident in Corridor 12, Jaren found himself standing ankle-deep in a vat of gelatinous fungal substrate, holding a malfunctioning nutrient dispersal wand, while a 7-limbed Zanari technician shrieked at him in 3 dialects simultaneously. You rotated the filament matrix without stabilizing the ion field. The Zanari howled, flailing all 7 limbs in disbelief. The mycelium's pH will destabilize within seconds. Jaren wiped a glob of greenish goo off his chin. You told me to clear the clogs. I cleared the clogs. You overcleared. I didn't realize there was such a thing as overclearing mold. There was a soft squelch as the vat began to bubble ominously. The Zanari let out a noise like a deflating accordion and dove for the control panel. Alarms started chirping. A thin mist rose from the edges of the vat, carrying a scent that reminded Jaren uncomfortably of burnt caramel and tires. By the time containment shields snapped into place, half the lab was sealed off, and Jaren's boots had begun to dissolve. He limped out barefoot, trailing slime. Junia met him in the corridor outside the lab, blinking at his appearance. Please tell me you didn't try to fix something again. I volunteered for cross-departmental cooperation, he muttered. It was supposed to be a 20-minute maintenance assist. She eyed the slime dripping from his elbow. You look like you lost a fight with a pudding elemental. Honestly, I think I did. He was still toweling off in the commons when a call came through his comm badge. Not from the lab or the disciplinary board, but from Instructor Avental, the station's head of cultural adaptation protocols. You're being reassigned, Tal said without preamble, effective immediately. To what? Emergency response simulation. The Drexians need a human participant for their final module. Jaren paused, one hand still in his hair. Why me? They asked for someone unpredictable. That evening, Jaren stood outside Simulation Chamber 6 in a borrowed Drexian-grade exosuit, trying not to think about how many of his bones would snap if the suit malfunctioned. The Drexians were known for their high-gravity military traditions and extremely literal training exercises. Jazin greeted him at the chamber entrance, already suited. You will be playing the civilian. Sounds safe, Jaren said. What's the scenario? Hostile breach. We are to protect you while you attempt to reach the extraction zone. Any chance I get a map? There is no map. The point is to adapt. The chamber doors ear-eyed open with a low hum, revealing a landscape of fragmented metal platforms suspended over a pool of what looked like molten mercury. Dim lighting and artificially induced tremors made the floor shudder beneath his boots. Overhead, simulated debris rained down from an unseen source. Begin, said the chamber AI. Jaren took one step forward and was immediately knocked sideways by a gust of pressure from a burst pipe. He slammed into a railing, bounced off, and hit the floor. Jazin lifted him by the back of his exosuit. Stay behind me. That's what I was doing. They moved forward under fire from auto-targeting drones. Jaren ducked behind cover, scanning for a path. We need to get across that suspension beam. It cannot support Drexian weight, Jazin said, but it can support mine. Jaren vaulted over a gap, the exosuit groaning. He landed on the beam, arms outstretched for balance. Wind from the chamber's environmental effects system howled around him. Halfway across, the beam buckled. He dropped to all fours, crawling. Jazin bellowed something in Drexian. A moment later, a grappling line snapped across the gap, anchored to a column. Jaren clipped it to his harness and swung the final few meters, crashing into the extraction zone platform. Civilian secured, he gasped. The simulation ended, lights brightened, wind died. Jazin approached with what might have been approval. You moved with initiative, risky but effective. I didn't see another option. That is the correct instinct. They left the chamber. As Jaren peeled off the exosuit, he noticed several other Drexians watching from the observation gallery. One tilted its head slightly in acknowledgement before turning away. Back in the commons, Junia was waiting with her forearm in a new brace. Let me guess, she said. You almost died again. Only a little, Jaren replied, simulated near death. Your idea of extracurriculars is getting progressively less sane. I'm not even signing up for these anymore. She handed him a nutrient bar. Eat. You look like you burned through your entire glucose reserve. He took it gratefully. Thanks, Doc. Not a doctor yet, she said, but she looked pleased. The next day, Jaren was summoned to a debrief with Tal. You demonstrated unusual problem solving, Tal said, reviewing footage. You used body weight ratios and dynamic propulsion to bypass an impasse. I guessed. Guessing under pressure is a form of accelerated analysis. The Drexians were impressed. That's not always a good thing. Tal's translucent fingers tapped the edge of the display. There's a delegation arriving from the Relian Concordium. They've requested a human liaison. I recommended you. Jaren's eyes narrowed. What's the catch? They're extremely sensitive to pain response. They find it confusing when other species mask discomfort. I'm not planning to get injured during a meet and greet. Then you'll be an anomaly. The Relians arrived the following cycle. They were tall, jointless beings with skin like flowing wax, and the disconcerting habit of synchronizing their speech into a single voice. Jaren met them in a quiet chamber lined with scent-neutralizing panels. "We wish to understand the human pain threshold," they intoned. Jaren blinked. "Why, you function under injury. This is illogical. It's not ideal, but we do what we have to." They extended a probe. "May we demonstrate?" "Wait, hang on, demonstrate what?" "A controlled stimulus. We wish to observe your reaction." Jaren hesitated. Then, against what he would later describe as all reasonable judgment, he nodded. The probe touched his arm. A sharp jolt ran through his nerves. He winced, but didn't pull away. The Relians observed silently. "That level is classified as moderate distress," they said. "Yet you did not retreat." "I've had worse." "Why?" "Because retreating doesn't help if the situation requires endurance." There was a pause. "You are not built for resilience, yet you choose it." Jaren shrugged. "It's kind of our thing." Afterward, one of the Relians remained behind. "You have altered our assessment. We had assumed your kind relied on external support for survival." "We do," Jaren said, "but sometimes we're the support." The Relian bowed slightly. "We will adjust our models." By the end of that week, Jaren had unintentionally added pain tolerance research subject to his resume. He celebrated by sleeping for 13 uninterrupted hours and waking up with a crick in his neck that felt like a punishment from the universe. Junia dropped by his quarters with a portable muscle stimulator. "You're going to need this," she said, tossing it onto his bed. "I saw the Relian footage. I didn't even scream." "That might be the problem." They sat in silence for a while, the stimulator humming softly against his shoulder. "I didn't plan any of this," Jaren said. "No one thinks you did." I came here to study software systems. I've ended up in combat simulations, diplomatic test panels, and some kind of pain Olympics." Junia tilted her head. "You think that's not software?" He frowned. "What? You're adapting to unpredictable input. You're rewriting responses in real time. That's what code does." He stared at her. "You're comparing me to a runtime compiler. You're doing more than most of the staff, and they're paid for this." Jaren leaned back. "I don't know if that makes me feel better or worse. Just don't get stabbed next week. No promises." 2 weeks after the Relian encounter, Jaren's left wrist made a sound it probably shouldn't have. He had been attempting to realign the grip tensioner on an outdated 0G stabilizer harness during an elective workshop on obsolete propulsion systems, a course he had picked mostly because no one else signed up. He'd braced the unit with one hand while twisting the calibration rod with the other, and something inside his wrist gave a sharp, tearing tug. He hissed and dropped the tool. "Joint trauma," said the instructor, a creased metallic being called Yorval who had the bedside manner of a malfunctioning coffee grinder. "You overexerted a tendon cluster, mostly your fault." "I'm right here," Jaren muttered, cradling his hand. "The pain is instructive," Yorval continued. "Do not repeat the error." Medical scanned him within 10 minutes. Junia intercepted him at the infirmary just as the diagnostics tether retracted from his wrist. "Let me guess," she said, rolling her eyes. Something mechanical fought back. "I'm starting to think tools have a vendetta against me. You've got inflammation in the extensor carpi ulnaris. Your grip's going to be a joke for at least 5 days." "They gave me a brace," he said, lifting his wrapped arm. "It smells like damp socks." "That's the antiseptic mesh. You'll live." Jaren tried to flex his fingers. "Do I need to cancel my next module? You'll need to stop trying to repair antique death traps." "That's what you need." They walked back toward the residential wing, Junia adjusting her pace so he didn't have to swing his arm awkwardly. As they passed the central corridor, a group of students from the Taiksari contingent paused mid-discussion and watched them pass. One of them gave Jaren a subtle nod. He didn't return it. "You're still getting weird celebrity treatment," Junia said under her breath. "It's like being famous for falling down the stairs impressively." "You didn't fall. You jumped over the railing and landed on your feet." Still stairs. In the common room, someone had left a 3-dimensional chessboard suspended in midair. Jaren reached for one of the pieces with his good hand, then winced. Junia gestured. Sit. No heavy lifting. I wasn't going to, you were, I know that face. He sat down. I'm getting tired of being the cautionary tale. You'd be surprised how many people find that inspirational. You mean entertaining? Junia didn't argue. Later that cycle, during the midday cycle rotation, Jaren received a formal invitation to a de-escalation symposium hosted by the Virelia staff. His presence was requested not as a participant, but as a demonstration subject for unique human behavioral response under duress. The phrasing left very little to interpretation. They want me to do what exactly? He asked Tal, who delivered the message via personal comm. Speak, briefly. About your decision-making during conflict, the simulation, the incident, the Relian interaction, cultural observations. I'm not trained for that. You weren't trained for any of it, that's the point. Jaren frowned. What if I say no, they'll invite someone else? Probably a theorist who's never met a human. He rubbed his temples. Fine. The symposium was held in the observation ring, a panoramic chamber with translucent flooring that gave the distinctly unsettling impression of floating above the gas giant below. Jaren stood at the front beside a rotating holo display that projected stills from previous station events. He recognized at least 2 images of himself. One mid-jump during the simulation, another from the Relian chamber, looking like he'd just swallowed a handful of tacks. Tal tapped a control node. Begin. Jaren cleared his throat. I've been called impulsive, reckless, and surprisingly durable by at least 3 species. I didn't come here to represent anyone, but I guess people started using me as a reference point. So here's what I've learned. Humans don't always know the right answer, but we move anyway. Sometimes we're wrong, but we adapt. And we don't always need to win. We just need to endure long enough to change the outcome. Several of the attendees exchanged glances. One of the Taiksari inclined its head with a sharp click that might have been approval. A few Drexian cadets in the back leaned forward, elbows on knees. Jaren stepped down without waiting for a response. Outside, Junia was waiting with 2 mugs of rehydrated mint tea. Did you just quote yourself? She asked. I panicked. I blacked out halfway through. You sounded like a motivational poster. I think I prefer the stairs metaphor, too late. You're a symbol now. They sat on the bench overlooking the lower arboretum where a few students were practicing low-gravity acrobatics. One of them over-rotated and landed face first in a patch of moss. No one laughed. They helped him up instead. Jaren sipped his tea. Do you think any of this actually matters? Junia didn't answer right away. I think it does, not just because of what you did, but because of how you did it. You didn't posture. You didn't try to dominate anyone. You just acted when it counted. Still feels weird. Good things usually do. The next morning, Jaren woke to a message from Krek. It was brief, no apologies, just an invitation, a Drexian-Tralaxian joint training exercise open to all species, limited slots, no spectators. Jaren was listed under preferred attendees. He stared at the message for a long time. At noon, he showed up at Simulation Chamber 3, where the exercise was already in progress. Krek stood at the edge of the staging area, adjusting the fit of his training harness. You came, he said without looking up. I wasn't sure I would. I wasn't sure you should. Jaren raised an eyebrow. But you sent the invite. You were the only human who didn't flinch when things got painful. That's not a compliment. It's a reason. The exercise was simple. Teams of 2 navigating a series of physical and logic-based challenges in variable gravity. Communication was crucial. So was trust. Jaren and Krek were paired together. The first obstacle was a corridor filled with shifting magnetic fields. Krek's armor interfered with the sensors. Jaren had to guide them manually, using only hand signals and environmental cues. They made it through with seconds to spare. The second challenge was a puzzle sphere rotating interlocks that had to be aligned according to a color pattern visible only from one side. Jaren spotted the sequence and shouted coordinates while Krek adjusted the mechanism. The final test was a series of collapsible platforms above a simulated lava field. One misstep and both would be out. Krek hesitated at the edge. Jaren didn't. He jumped first, landing on the first platform, then turned and extended his good arm. Krek took it. They reached the final platform together. Afterward, in the debriefing chamber, Krek said nothing. But as they exited, he gave Jaren a single, abrupt nod before disappearing into the crowd. Junia met him halfway back to the common room. "You look like you've been in a dryer." "Krek thinks I'm not useless now." Progress. They walked in silence for a while before Junia asked, "So, what now?" "I think I'm done proving anything," Jaren said. "Maybe I'll actually study for a change. Don't get too boring." "I won't." "My wrist still clicks when I bend it." They reached their shared corridor. The station lights dimmed into evening mode, casting soft shadows across the walls. "Hey," Junia said before heading to her room. "You changed things here, even if you didn't mean to." Jaren looked at his door. "I just didn't want to sit still." "Exactly." The door slid shut behind him. For the first time in weeks, the room felt quiet in a good way. No alarms, no injuries, no unexpected assignments. He sat down, flexed his wrist gently, and pulled up a blank project file. The screen asked for a title. He typed, "Adaptation Protocols, Human Variant." Then he hit save and shut it off. For tonight, that was enough.